Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Hey, psst. Hey, you see that Snickers over there? If no one's looking, you should just take it.
No! Don't listen to him, my son. That would be stealing, and stealing is a sin.
Sin Schmin, it's a friggin' Snickers bar. You deserve to have it. Sinning really satisfies you.
Repent, my child. Virtue is the only real snack worth savoring. For that candy bar is merely a gateway to nougat damnation. Has this ever happened to you?
Listening to the devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other, and you're not sure what to think?
Then we're here to help. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Tommy Metz III, and this season on All the Feelings, we're examining the 7 deadly sins.
You know, the fun ones.
And the 7 heavenly virtues.
Which are also a thing. Through personal stories, historical oddities, and way too much embarrassment, we take you on a thrilling journey through all the goods and the bads you hear about in church.
But without all that pesky church stuff. So come join us for All the Feelings Season 9, a sometimes funny podcast about being human. All the sins, all the virtues.
All in one place. Go to allthefeelings.fun to learn more, or subscribe to All the Feelings wherever you get your podcasts.
Game over.
Horror movies get a bad rap. They're cheap thrills, mindless gore, not cinema, blah, blah, blah.
But we here at Sitting in the Dark know better. We know that horror is more than just jump scares and chainsaws. It's a reflection of our deepest fears, our anxieties, Okay, and there's a lot of jump scares and chainsaws.
Join us, Pete Wright, Tommy Metz III, Kyle Olson, and Keenan Diaz, as we cut into the dark heart of horror cinema.
Every episode, we explore a different facet of the genre, from survival horror to home invasions, from zombies to birds. We tickle the tropes, analyze the angles, and sharpen our own axes along the way.
We'll introduce you to the classics that shaped the genre.
And the modern masterpieces that are pushing the boundaries of terror.
Sitting in the Dark is your guide to navigating the terrifying, thrilling, and sometimes hilariously bad world of horror movies.
We'll help you understand why we love to be scared.
And maybe even convert you into a horror fan yourself.
So turn off the lights, close the basement door,
and join us.
Sitting in the dark.
Hello, cats and kittens and non-binaries with and without your mittens. My name is Matthew. I'm here with Alex. We're on the Star Wars Generations podcast, and today we're continuing our coverage of Clone Wars Season 1 by talking about Alex's favorite episodes. Last week we did Erin's. Next week we'll do mine. But today it is time to talk about Alex's favorite episodes. And instead of having an arc, we have 3 specific episodes, each a kind of self-contained story. Episodes 5, Rookies, 10, Lair of Grievous, and 15, Trespass. So we'll talk about each one in a second individually, but Alex, let me just start by saying, why these 3?
Yeah, good question. As we were just trying to pick our favorite episodes, I also share my love of the episodes we're doing next week with you, but I wanted to highlight some of these because, I think the Clone Wars has some incredible arcs throughout the whole show, but I really enjoy the self-contained episodes because they really give us this extra insight into things that otherwise we wouldn't get to know about. Like, for example, in the Lair of Grievous, you get to learn, if there was never a Lair of Grievous, it would not affect me or canon or anything at all. But just knowing that existed and seeing where he lived and just the creepiness of how he's being put back together, and it just adds something a little extra to the story. And I feel like getting to see in each of these episodes has their own special reason why I like them, and I can kind of touch on that as we go along. But
yeah,
they're all really cool. I think. I don't know.
I mean, in some ways, I feel like you picked 3 episodes that set us up for some of the main themes of the whole show going forward. In that first episode is really an introduction to the clones and some of the stuff that they're going through, particularly some of the internal dynamics within the clones. Obi-Wan and Anakin are kind of very bit characters. It's mostly just the clones themselves who are the heroes of that one. Episode 10, the Lair of Grievous, we get some of Grievous's backstory, but also we really get to see how the war is affecting the Jedi.
Yep.
in important ways we'll talk about. And episode 15, Trespass, is really about how the people on all these places that are going to fight and in like far off parts of the galaxy that aren't necessarily connected to the Clone Wars, how they're all dealing with all this. That becomes so important because they're the ones who eventually will, going to go along with Chancellor Palpatine, then Emperor Palpatine's plans. So
Mhm.
I really like that. I don't even know how intentional it was, but just kind of giving us three important dynamics that are so important for the whole rest of the show.
You know, it's funny because when I first picked them, it was just because when I think back to the Clone Wars, they're just episodes I always enjoyed since I was younger. And then as I got older, I think I enjoyed them because of those themes being really present. Because as I was rewatching them today, the exact, like, you took the words out of my mouth, Matthew, and like, the exact way that each one really just, like, it's such a small contained story in each one, but they really speak to these larger themes that are present throughout the series. So I'm just very excited to talk about them.
Nice. So let's start with number 5,
Yeah.
Rookie. What's this episode about? Give us a very brief plot summary.
Yeah, so it's real quick, as you all know, the beginning of the Clone Wars, or if you don't know, the beginning of the Clone Wars is not in chronological order. They kind of bounce around through in the first few seasons. And so this is your introduction to a battalion of clones that we will see their backstory later in the series. We'll see their some future later in the series. But it centers on these rookies, basically. They call them shinies, that are based on this basically barren world, and their entire objective is to monitor for separatists to make sure that they don't advance on Camino. And General Grievous launches this plan to essentially kill the clones, take over the base, and sneak onto Camino to destroy the clone factory. And it's about the clones' attempt to survive that and retake the base to warn the Jedi that that's happening and prevent an attack on Camino.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting because we get this is our first in terms of the watch of it, although as you said, we'll get some chronology of it beforehand in later episodes. But this is our first introduction to a couple of characters who will become very important. Echo, who kind of lasts throughout this show and then has a part obviously to play in later shows, and then also Favs, who is an important character again and again in the Clone Wars, and then becomes an essential part of kind of one of the main plot lines, helping set up Order 66. And of course, Heavy is a character who we are going to see more of in later episodes earlier in time, but here we do see his untimely death.
Yeah, and we also get to see these rookies working under one of the few episodes we get to see Commander Cody and Captain Rex working together, which is a fun little treat, I think, as well. But yeah, I know I really like this episode because, like you said, it introduces all these characters that, especially like Echo goes on to become essentially the story and move on to be in Bad Batch, and just like generally just becomes like a very beloved clone. Same with Fives. But it's cool to see, like, these clones are, as they said in the beginning of the episode, the clones are rushed into service probably earlier than they really are ready to be in service, because just the nature of the war, like the clones are dying, they need to fill the needs, and Kaminoans don't have another 10 years to build up an army. And so you see them you see like their personality just being kind of very laid back, and it's almost like reminiscent of like, clips you would see from soldiers in Vietnam, where they're just kind of like being lazy, listening to the radio, and then like,
they're bored and they talk
bored.
About bored.
Exactly. They're bored. They're like bored teenagers essentially. And then an attack comes, and they have to and they're forced to spring into action, and they immediately have to deal with like the loss of their sergeant, and they have to try and survive to eventually retake the base. And by chance, Rex and Cody have to come to do a routine inspection, and they kind of help guide them. But it's really not about Rex and Cody as much as it's about the growth of these rookies and the sacrifices they're making during this whole battle.
Yeah. Like, one thing I thought was really apparent, granted, this is something that's going to be apparent so many different times and places, but this episode really helped with is, yes, these are all clones. Like, on a genetic level, each of these individuals is exactly the same. But there's still so much differentiation among them. And it's, on the one hand, there's a differentiation between the different ranks, of the more experienced ones, like the ones who probably were in Geonosis, versus these rookies. But also even just among them, you can see like between Heavy and Five and Echo, and I think there's one or two others, like, they're very different in how they approach problems. They've all got their own idiosyncrasies. And I love that in some ways, without it being like planned for, Rex kind of takes this as a like, all right, let's see what you got. I want you to prove yourself to me. Because again, if they're all clones, you would think like, okay, he just knows that they're all good at following orders. But instead, he really has this idea of like, you really, which a lot of generals I think understand, is you really don't know an army until it's been tested, until it's been under fire. And it ends in this kind of nice way of him, them feeling like they didn't fully succeed because they had to blow up their station instead of just taking it back from the droids and being able to turn off the signal that was letting the General Grievous and his ships possibly getting through. That part of the plot is really convoluted and doesn't make any sense, so we're just going to kind of ignore it. But like the the nature of it being that at the end, Rex is like, "You're all men who they're kind of men I want in the 501st Battalion." And that's just such a nice, like, kind of like establishing that Rex can see who they are and that they've kind of really proven themselves.
Yeah, and definitely like, early Clone Wars, while being wonderful, it definitely has it took a little while for the Clone Wars to fully get into like really solid story arcs. And I think as we get more in the seasons, they get better. But like in this episode, like they keep panning to Obi-Wan and Anakin with the fleet, and they're like, we can't get a hold of Rex and Cody. Like they're just not responding. And Obi-Wan's like, they would have told us if something's wrong, buddy. If they're dead or under attack, they're not going to warn you. He's just so like, it
Yeah.
felt very, very like uncharacteristic of Obi-Wan to just be like, everything's fine, we're not going to worry about it. So that part was silly too. Some of the plot was silly. But it was cool to see like you said, their individual personalities really shine through.
Yeah.
As it progressed down to at the very end, Heavy has to sacrifice himself to blow up the base, and it's like it's like a little bit of a sad moment, and like you can see how much like it, even Rex, who doesn't even know these clones, is like kind of heartbroken by it. But it just shows the clones are like want to do anything for their mission, no matter like how much they're different, how different they are, any level of goofiness they were showing earlier when they were just kind of bored. Like when push came to shove, they're like, I will put my life on the line. And it's specifically because this base, the Rishi base, was meant to protect their home world. So it was like this extra like chip on the shoulder of like, we can't let our brothers back home be attacked. So we need to protect this base at all costs. And I don't know. It's just I think an interesting episode, especially only 5 episodes into the whole series, to get to learn about the clones and see how they function as a unit.
I mean, it's very emotionally dark for what is
Yeah.
it's supposedly a kid show at this point, which I really liked, but also kind of threw me a little bit. It's like, wow, really, we're getting into like people like blowing themselves up for the good of everybody else. Just one other moment that I loved because it again says so much about his character. At one point, once they've all kind of connected, Rex and Cody and some of the rookies are going to go like blast their way into the station again to try and rescue it from the droids. And one of them gets ready to lead, and Rex just steps in and says, "No, son, I'm always the first one through." And it really just in that one sentence establishes so much about Rex's character. That yes, he's a commander. Yes, he's going to give these people a hard time, and like it makes sense for Cody to be the one who has the full picture and stays behind and gives the orders. But Rex is like, no matter how in command he is, he's going to be the first one under fire. He's going to be the first one to put himself in danger.
Yep, and he leads by example throughout the rest of the series. It very much like it sets the tone, you're right, for like who he is as an individual. And I mean I fucking love Captain Rex. So yeah, I really like that moment too. I also like the moment, just the last thing I'll mention is like when they first land and the droids are trying to like trick them into leaving, and the droid attack flare like comes up, and Rex does not hesitate for a second. He just executes this droid with the clone armor on. And Cody's like, dude, what the fuck? Like, you just shot this clone trooper. And it's just very like Rex does not hesitate. He just trusts his instincts. I think that's why he fits with Anakin so well. But it's just like no thoughts, just vibes, which I really appreciate.
Good at when well, because just vibes can certainly get some people killed, and we'll talk about that in a later episode and later
destroy
season.
The Empire, or destroy the Republic. I mean, but yeah, I think just good overall episode, good setup. And then like we talked about before, like, and we might talk about one of the episodes in the future, but this is the end of Heavy and like kind of like the transition of these rookies into the 501st. But we see in future episodes like this whole team together on Camino training and trying to like get out into the field. We see Echo and Fives move on to the 501st. Fives becomes essential in so many things, Echo as well. So it's just cool to see their beginnings but like weird to see us learn about them kind of in the middle of their journey. So I
Yeah,
don't know.
we'll definitely talk about that.
Yeah,
All right, let's get to episode 10,
this
Lair of Grievous.
this one's
So
real simple, y'all. Real simple
this is
plot.
really simple. It kind of connects to some of the episodes that had come before it, but basically we have a situation where Newt Gunray has escaped. Newt Gunray, obviously the leader of the Neomodians from Phantom Menace, who's been on trial. They were trying to have him on trial during Attack of the Clones, and like he kept kind of fixing the courts and stuff. He's being transported for trial once again, or maybe this is like he's being transported once again, and led by Asajj Ventress, he escapes. At the same time, General Grievous has failed a couple of times, and Dooku and Sidious are both getting really frustrated with him. And so Dooku kind of puts together this multi-layer plot to basically put two people against each other where he's going to be happy if either one kills the other. Because on the one hand, he is luring a couple of Jedi into a trap where they think they're chasing after Newt Gunray, but they're actually going to walk right into the Lair of Grievous with all of the many defenses and layers of traps and stuff like that Grievous has in his lair. But at the same time, also they're testing Grievous because they're very unhappy with how Grievous is doing, and this is kind of what the Sith do is, I think in their mind, if Grievous can kill the Jedi, and that means more dead Jedi, but also it means Grievous has proven himself, then great. And if the Jedi kill Grievous, well, that means that Grievous really wasn't up to the task, and it's time to get a new general.
Yeah, and I think this episode, sticks out to me for a couple of reasons. Like I mentioned, it's cool to see like a little bit of Grievous's backstory and some of that, but it's also, we were introduced to, first of all, to Kit Fisto at don't correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't ever see him speak in any form of Star Wars before this, right?
I think that is correct. Yes.
This is really like you get to meet Kit Fisto, kind of get his vibe a little bit. A lot more like chill and laid back than I may have expected. It's kind of funny, but and then you meet his former Padawan Nadar Ven, and you see that the vibe of Kit Fisto is not matching that of his former Padawan, and throughout the episode you can see that the war has very clearly affected and changed this young Jedi at a very impressionable age. And he basically even says at one point, we're at war, the rules have changed. We have to be willing to go all the way to destroy our enemy, which is very Anakin Skywalker thought process. And we all know how that ends up. And so and you see at the beginning, just the shock of Kit Fisto. At the beginning, he's kind of like, okay, Nadar Van, calm down, you're getting too excited. And then he just seems shocked, and then later just hurt, and then devastated because eventually the arrogance and the desire to fight and not be, cautious and tactful gets him killed. And Kit Fisto was just heartbroken. I'm sure he doesn't say it, but I'm sure he feels like he failed his Padawan. And at the very end of the episode, we just for a few seconds we see Yoda meeting with Mace Windu. We see Kit Fisto meeting with Mace Windu and Yoda says at point blank, he's like, this war is threatening to make us lose who we are as Jedi. And it's just that is, I feel like, a big theme in this episode, and like you said, a big theme in this entire series.
I feel like this episode does so much with foreshadowing. First of all, just as you said, we get some of Grievous's background, and though it's only hinted at, what we basically learn is that he was a person, from a race that had four, upper limbs, so the 2 legs and 4 arms is part of who he is, but that for some reason he chose to undergo this process of becoming, much more becoming a metallic and becoming a robotic figure, but that he was a sentient, living, organic being. And that process to me always is very much foreshadowing what's going to happen to Anakin with Vader. But even more so, the story you're talking about, because one of the things that they harp on is that not only was he kind of a little arrogant and really scarred by the war, but the Padawan was probably not actually ready to become a Jedi Knight. That in part because of the war, in the same way we talked about in the last episode, that some of these rookies are being thrown out into the field before necessarily they've had all their training. And this is something that a lot of the later episodes and books and stuff confirm, that maybe this Padawan would have stayed a Padawan for another year or two while he worked through some of this stuff. But because of the war, he had to be thrown in. And Kid Fisto is never quite rude enough to say, like, I don't think you should, be here. But like, he clearly is very surprised that this guy has gone through the trials and is no longer a Padawan. And he's trying to be supportive, but he clearly has his doubts. And for me, as you said, it foreshadows Anakin's fall. It foreshadows a lot of the problems that the Jedi are going to have throughout the war, of kind of being in over their heads and having to throw a lot of people who aren't ready for this into this. One of the things that really motivates Nadar, is that how you say his name?
I think so. Nadar Van, I think how you say it.
One of the things that really motivates Nadar is that he's very close with the clones and who he's with, and the clones get killed. And he's now angry. He's all the things about attachment that the Jedi are supposed to avoid, and that's a big part of what drives him to, kind of like Anakin at the start of Attack at the end of Attack of the Clones, where he charges in instead of waiting to fight with Obi-Wan. This guy charges in, he gets separated from Kid Fisto, and then it's pretty easy for Grievous to kill him.
Mm-hmm. And I think that even from the very beginning, before we even see the anger set in, like you said, he was not ready to be a Jedi. The things I was seeing, to put it simply, like as soon as they walk up, Nadar is like, "Let me show the way." It's very dramatic. Everything he does is very like dramatic and like using the Force. And it's like, if I was a Jedi as a kid, that's what I would do, because it's like, oh, I have this crazy Force power and like I can do all these fun things. And Kid Fisto even says it in point blank, like, those who have power should restrain themselves from using it.
Yeah.
And Nadar just keeps, like, at first he like seemed a little like upset that he had failed his master because he wants his master's approval, or his former master. And then later in the episode, he just seems resentful, like angry that Kid Fisto was questioning him. And he's like, I know what I'm doing. I know what I have to do. Like, you don't know, I do. And it's just, I don't know. It's just like, it's hard to watch a little bit. Because like, I think that like with a little more training and time, like maybe he could have been a better Jedi Knight. But it's just, again, you rush these teenagers into war, and this is what's going to happen. So I don't know.
Yeah,
And
this
then
episode really kind of proves the idea of like pride goeth before the fall.
Yeah,
and that's
big
exactly, think of Dooku's line, double the pride, twice the fall. It's very much what happens to Anakin. Twice the pride, double the fall. That's it.
Yeah. Also, the reason I remember Nadar Ven's name so much is when I first saw this episode back at middle school or something. I was taking Spanish classes, and Nadar means swim in Spanish, and Ven means come, like Come. So I don't know. His name, I guess, means like come swim, and he's of the Mon Calamari race, which I just think is very silly, very on the nose. But I just wanted to point that out.
God bless high school Spanish.
What did you say?
God bless high school Spanish.
God bless. I just want to touch also again on the Grievous thing. So what I really liked as a kid about this episode was like, so having read an inordinate amount of Wikipedia articles, what I know about Grievous's past is basically he was just, like I said, a great warrior. I don't actually know if his species had 4 arms or not. I think that might have been one of the enhancements, but like either way, he grew a big grudge towards the Jedi because they intervened on his planet. And Dooku and Sidious were like, we can enhance you. We'll help you kill more Jedi. And then Dooku actually organized a purposeful sabotage of a shuttle that Grievous was on at the time to make him like basically like almost die, and then submit himself to like full cybernetic reconstruction. And so he becomes this weird robot cyborg thing. And like, I just never really thought as a kid when I saw episode 3, like, what happens if he gets like damaged or something? But like, they just got a whole room of like hundreds of spare parts in this medical droid, I guess, that just puts him back together. And we don't actually get to see under his mask, but they remove his mask for repairs, and it's apparently extremely painful. And that's just kind of like, okay, the thing about Star Wars that I love is these little like nuggets of lore that like, again, if I never saw that or didn't have that, I wouldn't like actively be missing it or be like, oh, why is it not there? But like, it just adds a little depth to the overall recipe that is Star Wars. And I
remember a review that I read of Revenge of the Sith. It was written by someone of my generation who kind of shared a lot of the thoughts that I've talked about before, about that at this point in time, a lot of us really did not like the first and second of the prequels. And this guy talked about watching the movie and not really being sure how he felt about it. until General Grievous coughed. And he's like, you know what? This is a robot with tuberculosis. That doesn't make any sense. I love it. This is the most Star Wars thing ever. And I really kind of feel like that. We see some of that with Grievous, because he's not a perfect droid. He is the person who has all the idiosyncrasies of this being that went before him, including apparently bronchitis or something like that, like a bad cough. And it's just still there. And General Grievous is not my favorite in the movies or in the show, but I think this was a fun way to give us a little more depth to him, give us a little more horror to him, because this whole episode really has a kind of horror feel to it. And to show, like, how does he get those lightsabers that he uses at the end when he's fighting Obi-Wan and Anakin and all them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the last thing I'll bring up that I think it's just such a silly thing is Grievous has a pet dinosaur thing named Gore. That is my screen name today. And he sicks him on the Jedi and the clones, and all Gore can do is kill the one clone that was left. And then he's killed by the Jedi pretty easily. And Grievous comes back to the monitor after getting his repairs done and is like, I wonder if Gore is done killing the Jedi. And then his pet is dead, and he seems so sad. He's like, Gore. I'm like, brother, you sicked a metally like a robotically decked out velociraptor on 2 Jedi. What did you think was gonna happen?
Whereas the guy who's like the droid, who's kind of like his manservant, butler, and chief medical droid, like who he has a sassy relationship with, that guy gets chopped in half, and Grievous is like, that's fine.
It's really funny.
And I like how it ends, because he does win the battle, and he's kind of all proud, and he's talking to Dooku, and Dooku's like, well, I expected you to be able to deal with the Padawan and some clones, but if you kill the Jedi Master, then that is truly a victory. And Grievous at least comes clean. He says, well, Kid Fistu got away. And Dooku says, so there's clearly some room for improvement.
And then he just mic drop, goes away, and Grievous just goes, Rawr!
Yeah. And so it sets up further that, like, yes, he passed this test, but barely, and that there's still going to be a lot of, and to me, this is very much what the Sith do. And like, Asajj Ventress isn't a Sith, but I think she's a lot closer to being one than certainly Dooku ever is going to be, than Grievous is ever going to be.
Yeah.
But it sets up the same thing of, like, Grievous and Ventress are often played off against each other. This is what the Sith do: is they test people and they make them think, they make them be afraid, because they know they have to prove themselves, or else they might not make it to the next day.
Yeah, and it makes Grievous probably just even more just rageful and angry. And in Dooku's mind, maybe that will make him a better warrior. So
yeah, that's the whole essence of the dark side.
Oh yeah.
So let's go to a frozen land that is not Hoth, and where there are people that are not Wampas. Talk to us about Trespass.
Yeah, Trespass is a really good and really kind of unique episode. So Obi-Wan and Anakin are escorting the senator and the chairman of Pantora to this essentially like frozen moon, satellite planet in their system, because there was a clone base there that had like gone dead. So we're gonna investigate, and the senator and the chairman are there for whatever. I don't really know why they're there, but they're there. So they check it out. All the clones are dead. And immediately the chairman, who is very clearly a warhawk, is like, it must be the separatists. Prepare to kill everyone, and I want guns ready. I want war machines ready to roll. And Obi-Wan and Anakin are like, let's calm down. Like, this is even the senator is like, dude. Her name is Senator Chuchi, who becomes important throughout the remainder of the show and is in the Bad Batch. But Senator Chuchi is like, chairman, there's no blaster marks. There's no dead droids. This wasn't the separatists. And the chairman being just so arrogant, and he's like, oh, now you're a master of, you're super knowledgeable about war now. And this episode, you see the senator really come into her own and kind of go from more of a shy, I'm gonna defer to others, to by the end she's like Padme level badass.
Right.
There's my extra Padme. But
and this is all happening on the planet of Plutonia, which is kind of like a moon of Pantora.
Yeah, it's just a little tiny rock.
And one of the things that really matters is that there's the debate about who has authority over it, because the Pantorans claim it, especially the Chancellor, whereas the Galactic Republic is sort of saying no, that they have jurisdiction there, and the Senator is very much caught in the middle between this.
Yeah, and then in this investigation, they discovered that there had been a droid base that was also attacked, and there they find a recording that some other creatures are on this planet. Obi-Wan and Anakin go to investigate. The last place the droids had investigated and discover this race called the Tulls, which is this intelligent species, yet primitive. You know, they're still using spears and ride on the back of, I don't know what the creatures would be called, but some native creatures. And clearly have their own society and civilization. And they're basically like, hey, you know, we're sorry that, you know, we attacked your clones and your guys, but like, you know, we just want to be left alone. We were attacked. No one and Anakin are like, hey man, no worries. You know, you this is your place. You were here clearly before the Pantorans, because you cannot have traveled here by space. You're still riding like ice lions around. And so they go back to the Pantorans and are like, hey, like we negotiated, like that you two are going to be able to talk. And the chairman's like, I want them all dead. I want them killed. Like they are trespassers. Thus the team Trespass for the episode. They're savages. They have no rights. Senator's like, if they can communicate with the Jedi, then clearly they are intelligent, and their status of owning this planet would be in question. But the chairman is just so proud, and he says that he's ruled the planet since before the senator was born, and he thinks he makes all the right decisions. And the whole time, like everyone on that fucking planet, like wants there to be peace, except for the chairman. But the chairman just keeps like, kind of Donald Trumping the whole situation and just kind of forcing like, no, we're gonna do what I want, what I say. And then later, like a little skirmish does break out, because when they meet, the chairman's like, I'm not gonna leave. You can't tell me what to do. How dare you, you savage? And but using C-3PO as a translator. And because of the little skirmish that breaks out, the chairman ends up getting killed by a Toll spear. And the thing that really sticks out to me about him is that before he dies and as he dies, he essentially says the same thing to the senator, like, I'm prepared to die for my people. Like, are you prepared to do the same? Is what he says to her originally. And then at the end, as he's dying, the senator's like, I spoke with like the Assembly of Pantora. They called you out of line. Like, I'm going to negotiate a peace. And he's like, how dare you? How could you? I died for our people. And to me, that just speaks to the very misguided principle that has existed in American culture, especially, but in a lot of cultures, of like, the only way to honor your country or to be useful to your people is to die for it. And that's just not true. Like, and there's no, I'm not actively throwing shade or anything on the military, like, but it's just that it's not the only way. And oftentimes, almost all the times, military force is like the worst option we have.
Yeah.
And this episode really speaks to that. And then again, can you extrapolate that lesson to the larger story?
Yeah, I think that's a very big part of it. There's a great quote, I forget who it's from, but that like, it's easy to die for your country, the hardest thing is to live for it. And that's kind of what Tucci winds up saying, first to the chairman who won't listen to it, and then to the chief of the Talls who does listen. And then to the chief of the Talls who does listen, which is this idea of like, can we live for our planets instead of dying for them? And I think you're right that that's definitely a theme. And the other theme, I think, is that this is really a story about sort of colonizing and a colonizing group and an indigenous group. Lucas said that he wanted kind of a classic Western story where the civilized people look down on the savages, which is a term that, like, I'm putting up quote marks, but those are the exact terms that the Pantorans use all the time. And when Riki and I covered, and Sarah covered these episodes a number of years ago, one of the things I remember I was talking about was that the accents sound an awful lot like South African accents, and I don't think that that's unintentional, because it's very much echoing that same kind of language of like, we are like the ones God put here to rule this land, and these are savages. And he keeps insisting that because they are savage, because they are not civilized in the way that they understand, that they should not be seen as a legitimate people by the Republic, that they should just be seen as like, trash, to be wiped out so the Pantorans can claim this as their own. And it's very much the same kind of language that colonizers have always used to justify the oppression, the genocide, the murder, the enslavement of whatever native people are there on the land. That
he literally says, we own you. This
Yeah.
planet belongs to us. We own you. Is what his words he says. It's very much you're correct. Like it's just like
Yeah.
it's that colonization. Like these aren't people. These are just animals, which we've
Yeah.
heard historically so many times, including in this country less
Mhm.
than 100 years ago.
Yep. And if you want to, this is also cool because, this isn't really called out in any way. There's no reason why it should be. But if they look familiar to you, if you Google the Tals live action, you will
Mhm.
see that they're one of the races that's shown in the Mos Eisley Spaceport back in Star Wars: A New Hope. And I like that we get new things a lot, but I also like that we're sort of just filling that in, and that over the course of the Clone Wars, a lot of those species that we see just for like a few seconds at some point, or maybe a little bit longer in the original trilogy, get a lot more backstory. Think about like the Twi'leks and the Rhodians, and like we got like we got Greedo and we got the Twi'lek dancer, and now we have these much larger backstories to them and their peoples because of the Clone Wars.
Mhm.
And this is another species for who that's true.
And I like to also think about the fact that they could not master space travel, but then ended up at a spaceport about 20 years later, 22 years later. So
Mhm.
20 years, they figured out intergalactic space travel, which fucking good for them.
Right? Well, and like, there's an extent to which, like, could they not do it, or they just not care?
Sure,
But
sure,
now
sure,
that they're
sure.
part of the Galactic Republic, they kind of want to go, off and do their own thing.
Yeah,
I don't know if their scientists have invented it or if just someone sold them a ticket, but either way,
fair
like,
enough, fair enough.
they get around.
But yeah, and
Yeah.
like I just want to also touch on again, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but the Pantoran Senator Chuchi,
Mhm.
in the beginning of this episode, we see her just whatever the chairman says, she just says, yes, Your Majesty. It defers to him, defers to him. You
Mhm.
see her try to speak up here and there, but it's very shy. And then even after the chairman dies, she's basically like, Master Kenobi, like you're an amazing negotiator. How about you negotiate on Pantora's behalf? And he's like, absolutely fucking not. Like
Right.
this is an affair between you and the Toes. It has to come from you. It's your duty. And she's like protest. She's like, I'm gonna order you. And he's like, no, you have to do it. And basically, like Obi-Wan has to teach his own teaching moment and pushes her to do it. And so she, you know, gains the courage and just decides like, to just go up there and says that, what you said, like it takes a lot of courage to die for one's people, but even more courage, whatever the quote is, to live for my people. And I choose to
Mhm.
live. What do you choose? And the Toast choose to live as well. And they end up like making a nice little peace agreement. And it was just very like a very like a coming out of out of her shell, out of her cocoon moment. And like from this episode forward, the way we see Senator Tucci is like she's always included in that group with Padme, Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, like one of the like rebellious senators who are going to speak their minds. And it all spurred from this experience on this moon of a moon with Obi-Wan and Anakin.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was really powerful, and I'm also struck by the fact that a lot of times, the person, especially in kind of more like kids-oriented media, the person who was wrong learns the lesson by the end and is able to accept it. And literally with his dying breath, when his own people, not just Chuchi, but his own like the council that he was the chairman of,
Mhm.
have rejected what he's doing and said, no, we should make peace, he still holds to his idea and like, no, I can't believe I died for these people who don't agree with it. And to me, it's a stark reminder that like you're not always going to convince everybody, and that sometimes that's just the way it is, and it sucks. But it that sometimes it is that harsh.
Yep,
Yep.
100% agree.
Mhm.
Something before we end the episode, I want a little fun fact for everyone out there. That's very silly, but 2 or 3 years ago now, I say maybe 2022. Columbia, the brand, did a limited series of parkas and heavy sweatshirts that were based on Obi-Wan and Anakin's outfits from this specific episode, which
That's
is
amazing.
so random. But I own the Anakin Skywalker heavy Columbia sweatshirt. So it's the exact same, that blue color with the big Jedi insignia right where it is on Anakin's jacket. They had a white one with the red insignia for Obi-Wan, and they also made one for Ahsoka based on a winter jacket she had worn in a
Mhm.
later season. But I just thought it was very wild that out of all of the possible things they could have done, they chose to focus on this one-off episode in the first season of the Clone Wars to base a clothing line off of. But I'm very proud. It's like one of my favorite pieces of clothing. It's very warm. I wear it all the time in the winter.
That's awesome.
But just had to let you all know that exists in the world.
We'll have to get a picture of you in that. So
Oh,
I love that.
absolutely.
Well, and speaking of such things, if you want a, apparently when speaking of such things, we are not sponsored by Columbia, but maybe Columbia website still has that kind of stuff. But we are sponsored by Level Up Lightsabers. Level Up Lightsabers is a great place to get lightsabers. And if you go to the link in our show notes, any purchase you make, we're going to get a little bit of that back. It's a great way to support the podcast. Get something we're entering into con season. It's going to be going on all spring and summer and fall. And if you want a lightsaber for your cosplay, lightsaber makes a good birthday gift for someone. You want to get a pair of lightsabers and start learning how to duel and train. The Level Up Lightsabers website has information about that. And if you go through the link in our show notes, like I said, you'll get to help support the podcast. Another way to help support the podcast is by becoming a member. $5 a month, $55 a year. You get bonus-free, ad-free content, bonus content at the end of every episode that we're about to get into, continuing our trek through the From a Certain Point of View book. You get full bonus episodes once a month, and mostly you get to help us keep the lights on. The members are really what drives all this and keeps it going. So thank you so much for considering that. For our members, stick around. We have some great more content for you. For everybody else, may the Force be with you.
Stay classy, Pantora.
And Plutonia.
Matthew, you want to give me 5 minutes to read that story real quick? I was working all day today. I'm so sorry.
Yes, it's fine.
I can read it super quick. Let me go get the book. Hold on.